The Prophet Muhammad told us that whoever builds a mosque for Allah, Allah will build for him a similar house in Jannah. And we know the great reward that will not only be gained, but rather will fill your grave after your death. Whenever someone prays there, whenever someone gives shahada in the masjid, whenever someone learns something in the masjid, yes, that will be something that you'll have on your scale.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you guys doing? Rيتشارد Dawkins is a new atheist who is also an evolutionary biologist, has written many bestsellers against religion, probably most notably The God Delusion, which he wrote in 2008. At a time actually where new atheism was, I would say, on the ascendancy. Now it's actually on a very steep decline. And he started to speak about religion and has responded to me, as you'll see in these clips, because maybe he realizes that new atheism is dying and he needs to rescue it from complete, or resuscitate it from complete death. So he tries to respond. Let's take a look at the first clip and respond to that clip in kind.
The universe is very complex. Now, if you look at the properties of the universe, as documented by theistic and atheistic cosmologists, they refer to a fine-tuning of the universe. I talked about Martin Rees, who wrote a book, Just 6 Numbers. He details 6 numbers. All of these numbers, he says, describe the reality of the universe. He said, had one of these numbers been different, the universe would not be able to facilitate human life, and there would not be a fine-tuning of the universe. Or the universe could not exist in the complex way it does. If we look around and see the intelligent design, it must really follow that we say that there must be an intelligent designer. You see what I mean?
Martin Rees did indeed write a book called Just 6 Numbers, and he did indeed say that if any one of those numbers, but the fundamental constants of physics, had been a little bit different, you wouldn't have got the universe as we know it, and you wouldn't have got life. And that's a very respectable argument, which physicists often put. There are various answers to it. One is that if the universe had been different because of this, then maybe a different kind of life would have evolved. But a much more powerful argument is the one that Martin Rees himself actually prefers, and which that speaker, whoever it was, ignored, which is to say that there is a multiverse. There are other good reasons to expect a multiverse. There are other good reasons which physicists have. It follows from other physical theories that there will be not just one universe with one set of physical constants, but millions of universes with different values of the physical constants. And most of those universes will not be conducive to life, will not be conducive to producing galaxies, to producing planets, to producing chemistry, to producing life. But a minority, maybe only a very small minority, will be. And of course, we have to be living in one of that minority, because here we are. That's the so-called anthropic principle. And that's the argument that Martin Rees himself puts forward in that very book, which that man selectively quoted.
Okay, so that's very interesting, because he starts off with a kind of cordial tone, a very respectful tone, and he refers to the argument that I put forward, and this is an argument maybe I made about 7 or 8 years ago. He calls it actually a respectable argument, and he's familiar with the work of Martin Rees, who wrote the book Just 6 Numbers. Now, of course, I've developed this argument quite considerably throughout my PhD and my thesis, which hopefully will be done maybe the next year or so, and then I can publish it and people can read it. On the contingency argument for God's existence. And I do have specialized chapters and specialized talking points about the fine-tuning. But it should be noted that this is not a point of controversy between us, the theists, and you guys, the new atheists, or whatever it is you refer to yourself as. Because Rيtchارد Dawkins himself mentions in The God Delusion, which is a book that was written in 2008, that there is a life-permitting range, which he refers to actually as a Goldilocks zone. That the proportions of the universe are significantly proportioned in a manner that, had they been different, that life would not exist in the universe. That is something he admits to quite freely in The God Delusion. In fact, Christopher Hitchens, another person of the New Atheist movement, there was a video of him speaking about this particular argument, and he considers it as well, or at least he implies it's a very respectable argument. But then Richard Dawkins comes and says, well, what about the multiverse? What about if there's millions of universes, etc., etc.? And then he refers to what is referred to, or he refers to as the weak anthropic principle. That the universe, had the universe not been the way it is, we wouldn't have observed it as such. And therefore, it's kind of, he's downplaying the significance of the fact that the universe has certain proportions which allow life to exist in it. And this is the fine-tuning argument. The response to this has already been, he's already heard the response to this from people like John Leslie, who have repudiated the weak anthropic principle, which is now rubbished in all of philosophy in a manner that I'm surprised he's actually mentioning it again after how heavily he was repudiated by John Lennox and others. John Leslie mentions that the similitude of saying that the universe is the way it is because we observe it as such is the same as had somebody been, let's say, for example, you got Richard Dawkins and he's being shot by 50 marksmen. Okay, so you got Richard Dawkins on the mall, and then you got expert marksmen pointing the gun at Richard Dawkins and shooting and trying to aim at his head, trying to shoot him and kill him. Yeah, you got 50 marksmen that tried to kill him and destroy him. And these are expert marksmen who are not too far away from him. You know, they all miss. And then Richard Dawkins, he looks around and sees all the bullets. And he says, well, I'm so lucky because had that not been the case, I would not be here. Had that not been the case, I had not been here. So John Leslie is saying the similitude of saying that the universe, had it not been the case, we wouldn't be able to observe it, is the same as the person who was subject to that barrage of fire, shots fired by the marksman, would be the same as that particular analogy. Now, in a nutshell, what you can say is it's a tautological talking point. You cannot explain a thing by a thing and expect that to be an explanation. In fact, that contravenes the principle of sufficient reason, a principle that was promulgated, of course, by Leibniz, but by others. Even atheists like Arthur Schopenhauer, who, I don't want to go into much detail here, but he actually wrote his PhD thesis on the four points of the principle of sufficient reason. Many people throughout the time of Aristotle, etc. The question is, why? Why is the universe proportioned in such a manner? Why is it proportioned in such a manner that had it not been proportioned in this manner, that life would not exist? What's the explanation for that? And you citing the observable universe as an explanation is not actually an explanation. It's a tautological talking point, and you have to understand that. Then he mentions the multiverse. The multiverse does not answer this question. Because, say, for example, going back to the marksman point, if Richard Dawkins, after 50 people tried to kill him with guns, and he's like, and then he comes out and he says, wow, I'm so lucky I have not been killed by the 50 expert marksmen who are trying to shoot my head off. But then he says, well, many people who have been aimed at by marksmen have been killed. This is the similitude, because he's basically saying you have many potential universes, which, by the way, there's no scientific evidence for. There's no scientific evidence for any multiverse, by the way. There's no tangible, observable evidence. But for the sake of argument, even if you do cite whether a finite or infinite number of multiverses to try and repudiate the idea of a fine-tuning or the fact that the universe is proportioned in such a manner, uniformly and regularly, in order to allow life to exist, then that would not be a sufficient explanation, because it's the similitude of that would be to say, well, many people have been killed by a marksman. Just because I have not been killed by a marksman or 50 marksmen that tried to kill me, it doesn't mean anything, or it's not significant. It is still significant that even if everybody else who's been shot by marksmen has been killed, you not being shot by marksmen who are trying to kill you is significant. And our question is, what's the best explanation for that? You said it's a respectable argument, and so you understand that, but you don't have a sufficient response. Your responses have been repudiated heavily in the philosophy of religion, in even physics. Physicists have realized that this is a nonsense argument, and that's why barely anyone uses the weak anthropic principle except for you. So that's my first response to your first query. And let's move to the second one.
What happened before So you go for the Big Bang argument.
Well, physicists are debating this. I'm not a physicist, but they're debating it. My point is that they don't know, and I don't know, and you don't know, and it doesn't help to postulate a God that did it.
How do you know that he doesn't know if you don't know? I mean, this doesn't make sense to me. And he does this all the time. If you're an ignorant person, then how do you know that someone else's ignorance is identical to your ignorance if you're ignorant? Having your epistemological cake and eating it as well at the same time. How can you have both? If you're ignorant, then don't be an arrogant, ignorant person. Because if you're an agnostic, which of course you call yourself an atheist. I mean, Richard Dawkins calls himself an atheist, but in reality, he's an agnostic. So he's saying, I don't know, but you don't know as well. But then if you don't know, how do you know that he doesn't know if you don't know? It's arrogant ignorance. Let's just call you what you are, Richard Dawkins. You're an arrogant man because you're postulating what other people do or do not know, but also you're an ignorant man because agnosticism is basically ignorance. That's all it is.
I said a sort of standard rhetorical device, I don't know and you don't know and physicists don't know. Well, it's true that I don't know and physicists don't know. And if physicists don't know, then Piers Morgan most certainly doesn't know. And therefore, although it's correct that I don't actually know whether Piers Morgan knows anything, I'm pretty confident in saying that if the physicists don't know the answer to that question, he doesn't either.
So here, if you listen to what he says, he goes, well, how do I know? And we're talking about epistemology here. And how do I know that you know, and that you know, all that kind of thing. And he's basically saying, well, that's, of course, it's correct. I don't know what Piers Morgan meant. He says, it's correct. If it's correct, I could just suffice with that and say, if I'm correct, then I can just leave it there. It's correct that you don't know if he's ignorant or not. If you're not sure if he's ignorant or not, then that's it. It's sufficient. You shouldn't arrogate that. However, you then move on to say, well, if physicists don't know it, then Piers Morgan won't know it. Who made physicists the ultimate arbiter for all ultimate questions? That's my question to you. Even if you read Stephen Hawking, which I'm sure you have, Brief History of Time, almost anyone who speaks about the universe, especially like even Sean Carroll, I've read something of him, someone who also debated William Lane Craig. I debated William Lane Craig. Sean Carroll debated him. You didn't, by the way, Richard Dawkins, because for whatever reason, you didn't want to debate a philosopher, and I can understand why you wouldn't want to engage with me either. Of course, you're welcome to. We can have a discussion. I'll be very cordial with you, very respectful with you, and this and that. It can be on your channel, his channel, or a third-party channel. It could be a debate, it could be a discussion, it could be a podcast. That's always open to you, Dr. Dawkins. And it would be a very interesting discussion. Or you can discuss with my friend Sabur Ahmed, who is a specialist in evolutionary matters when it comes to the philosophy of biology, etc., and linking that to faith and theology. So you have these options. But the point I'm making to you is physicists are not the ultimate arbiter for the ultimate questions about what happened before the Big Bang. Because the question of what before the Big Bang, or what explained the Big Bang, or what caused the Big Bang, or whatever it may be that you want to formulate, the question about that is a philosophical question because it requires inference. If you say, well, for the sake of argument, let's assume that you would say it's a multiverse for the sake of argument, infinite or finite amount of universes, then still you need to have an explanation for your multiverse. What's the best explanation for your multiverse? And if you do have a multiverse of an infinite or finite amount of multiverses, then is that multiverse not composed of different component parts? And if you've got a multiverse that's composed of different component parts, doesn't it require an explanation outside of itself in order to explain its contingency? Because everything that is made of parts, component parts, is contingent. And if you have a multiverse that is made of component parts, the multiverse would also be contingent. So it would require something necessary outside of itself in order to explain it, to give it explicability, if you like, intelligibility. So this is the point. You're not really engaging, and you didn't engage, because I've read your books. I've read almost every single one of your books. You have not engaged with these arguments. Why is it that you've written a book of 320 pages, Richard Dawkins, or more, which is your bestseller, and you spent less than 5 pages of that book discussing the cosmological argument, which you know is one of the most popular arguments for God's existence, and you then averted and circumnavigated the debate with William Lane Craig, a person who I debated myself and discussed with, and he debated me. Why did you run away from that? Why did you avert your attention from that? Why did you not want to engage with him? I think the reason is because you know that you'll be cornered. I believe that. I genuinely, strongly believe that. I think that you know that when these questions are put to you, you will not have a sufficient answer. Prove me wrong, Richard Dawkins. Send me an email. Send me something we'll get your team members to send me some kind of an Instagram message or a Twitter message or something. Let's arrange a discussion. You've discussed with people from all kinds of... Why haven't you discussed with Muslims yet? You've spoken about Islam a lot. Recently, you've spoken about Islam in your tweets and stuff. Why not discuss? Well, if you don't want to, it's not a problem. We've refuted you anyway. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Hey you! Are you wasting your time on social media again? Your brothers and sisters in Islam Net from Norway are establishing a masjid, a dawah center. Establishing a masjid to convey the message of Islam is one of the best deeds a Muslim can do. There's a huge need for it in Norway. You know this and I know this. So that makes the reward even greater. So give generously and Allah Azza wa Jal will give you even more.